Hello and welcome to the Intel Brief. Today is Wednesday, the 12th of August. I'm your host Daniel, and today we're going to talk about a drone strike has hit the Libyan oil complex, Syria has sentenced Assad to death in absentia, and Russia has freed a sick US Marine called Robert Gilman. So firstly, a drone strike has hit the Zawiya oil complex west of Tripoli, damaging one of Libya's few functioning refineries and disrupting fuel supply to the capital. The attack sharpens the standoff between Abdul Hamid Dabia's Government of National Unity in Tripoli and Khalifa Haftar's Eastern Forces, with local commanders al-Masuri's militias entangled in fighting over the coastal corridor. Libya's oil infrastructure remains the recurring pressure point in a conflict that has left the country split between rival governments since 2014. So what? Firstly, I think it's interesting to see, drone attacks on oil infrastructure spreading to other countries. Possibly took a leaf out of Ukraine's book there. But I think renewed fighting around Zawiya is almost certainly to disrupt fuel supplies to Western Libya in the near term, kind of trying to disrupt the government's control over the region. Well, that part of the government, let's say. Haftar's forces are likely to keep targeting oil infrastructure as leverage against the Tripoli government. Basically, again, trying to apply pressure to the people within Tripoli to try and, get concessions. I think a negotiated national settlement before the next election cycle remains unlikely, given the current entrenched split within the country. And next, a Syrian court has sentenced former President Bashar al-Assad to death in absentia over crimes committed during his rule, the most significant judicial move against him since his government collapsed. Assad remains in exile in Russia, which has shown no intention of surrendering him, leaving the verdict symbolic rather than enforceable. The ruling reflects an effort by Syria's new authorities to formalize accountability and consolidate legitimacy at home. So what? It seems Moscow is highly unlikely to extradite Assad, leaving the sentence unenforceable for the foreseeable future. I think the verdict is likely to bolster support for the new government's domestic legitimacy among the victims of the former regime. And I think there's going to be increased pressure on former regime figures still inside Syria in the future. They're going to try and come for accountability. I think it's likely that they already have sentenced a few to death. It's just not become widely known. And lastly, Russia has released Robert Gilman, a former US Marine held in a Russian penal facility, amid reports of serious deteriorating health. Gilman had been serving a lengthy sentence after convictions tied to assault charges during his detention in the Voronezh region. His release comes as Washington and Moscow sustain a fragile pattern of prisoner exchanges against the backdrop of the wider standoff over Ukraine. So what? Gilman's release, I think, is likely a goodwill gesture tied to broader US-Russia detainee diplomacy, also likely trying to, get some more kind of support back from the current US administration, who seems to have flipped on them recently. Moscow will almost certainly continue to use detained Americans as bargaining chips in future negotiations. I think this is why traveling to Russia as a Western citizen is extremely foolish, because even if you're not doing anything wrong, it's possible that you will get tied up in these games and detained for some reason to be used as a bargaining chip in the future. And I think a wider thaw in US-Russia relations remains unlikely, despite the occasional humanitarian releases. It seems to be like a bit of a pushback against this whole pro-Russian narrative within the Trump regime. Recently with, I think it's Laura Loomer, she was a very outspoken critic of the Ukrainian government and the entire war in Ukraine, essentially saying that it was all Ukraine's fault. She seems to have flipped quite heavily recently and even traveled to Ukraine and showed significant support for the country. And I think this was kind of seen as like a bit of a flipping of like the pro-Russian narrative within the MAGA movement. So it's interesting. It's possible that Russia here is trying to win some credibility back. It's also possible they just didn't want him to die in their custody because it would look terrible. Yeah. But anyway, that's been the Intel Brief. I've been your host, Daniel, and I'll see you again tomorrow. See you.